My stepmother smirked. You don't want to dig any deeper. When I confronted her about my mom's death. So I hired a private investigator and found out she'd paid someone to fake the autopsy. It was a damp, miserable Tuesday morning in Pittsburgh. The fog had crept in early, rolling off the river and curling its way around the buildings like it owned the place. I was standing in my small kitchen, staring out at the blanket of gray with half a cup of cold coffee in hand. An apple sat on the counter, half peeled, already browning at the edges, and I was only half present, my mind wandering back over the past year, lingering on a feeling I hadn't been able to shake. My mom had died 1 year ago today. Just like that, gone. Some kind of unexpected heart complication, they said. But nothing about it had ever felt right, not the funeral, not the closed casket, not the way my stepmother Claire had insisted everything was fine, handled, taken care of. I'd spent the last 12 months trying to push down that gnawing feeling, convincing myself that I was just grieving, that nothing really was wrong. But it wouldn't go away. And I kept coming back to the same questions. Why was everything so rushed? Why didn't I ever get a clear answer about what happened? As if on cue, my phone buzzed on the counter. I picked it up to see a message from my sister Vanessa. Hey. Been a year. You doing okay? I scoffed softly, typing back, not really, Nessa. Still feels off. A moment later, my phone buzzed again with her reply, Ross, we've talked about this. Sometimes people just die. Mom's gone, and nothing's gonna bring her back. Try to let it go. Let it go. I was so tired of hearing those words. The last time I brought this up to Claire, she'd given me the same spiel, honey, I know it's hard, but your mother was a private person. She wouldn't have wanted all the fuss. Fuss. A whole life was gone, and she was calling it a fuss. It was infuriating, and the more I thought about it, the more certain I became that there was something there, some piece of the puzzle that didn't fit. I didn't even realize I'd started dialing until Claire's voice crackled through the line. Ross? Her tone was wary, like she'd been expecting this call but dreading it all the same. It's me, I said, pacing around my tiny kitchen, trying to keep the edge out of my voice. Listen, I've been thinking. Mom's death, it's still not sitting right with me. Oh, honey, she sighed, her voice slipping into that syrupy tone she used when she wanted to sound understanding but couldn't hide the irritation underneath. We've gone over this, haven't we? Your mother had a history of. Of what? I interrupted, barely keeping my frustration in check. Claire, you keep saying she had a history, but I never saw anything. No symptoms, no warnings, nothing. 1 minute she was fine, and then, I stopped, trying to get my emotions under control. Then she was gone. Just like that. Silence stretched on the other end. I could almost hear her thinking, measuring her words. Ross, she said finally, her voice taking on that same condescending edge, you don't want to dig any deeper. I felt the blood drain from my face. What the hell does that mean? Nothing, she said quickly, too quickly. Just. For your own peace of mind, honey, let it go. Sometimes, it's better to leave things as they are. And with that, she hung up. I stood there, the hum of the disconnected line still buzzing in my ear, my heart pounding. It wasn't just what she'd said, it was the way she'd said it, that smug little undertone, like she knew something I didn't. Something she didn't want me to find out. Maybe I was just going crazy, but at that moment, I didn't care. I knew what I had to do. 2 days later, I found myself sitting in a small, dimly lit diner across from a man named Daniel Fletcher. He was in his early 40s, wiry and sharp-eyed, the kind of guy who looked like he'd seen a few too many things and was just tired enough to keep looking. You're serious about this? He asked, his voice flat, his pen poised over a small notepad. Completely, I said, though a part of me was still half expecting him to laugh me out of the diner. He didn't. Instead, he nodded and jotted something down. So you think your stepmother had something to do with your mother's death? Not exactly, I replied, trying to organize the chaos in my head. It's more like. I don't know. There are too many loose ends. She arranged everything. The funeral, the closed casket, the autopsy report, it was all handled before I even knew what was happening. I never saw my mom. Not once. Daniel looked up, studying me with those sharp eyes. And you didn't think to question it at the time? I felt my face flush with embarrassment. I was a mess. My sister was a mess. Claire kept saying it was what my mom wanted, and I guess I went along with it. But now. I clenched my fists, feeling the frustration boil over again. Now, every time I ask about it, she just shuts me down. And I can't stop thinking that she's hiding something. He tilted his head, scribbling a few more notes. All right. First things first, I'll get the records on your mom's autopsy. See if there's anything unusual. 3 days later, Daniel called me back to the diner. This time, he didn't waste any time with small talk. He slid a thin folder across the table, watching me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. What's this? I asked, flipping open the folder. It's a copy of your mother's autopsy report, he said, his voice low. It says her death was caused by complications from a pre-existing heart condition. I looked up at him, confused. But she didn't have a heart condition. Exactly, he said, leaning forward. I cross-checked every medical record I could find on your mother. There's no mention of any heart issues, ever. My stomach dropped. So, you're saying? He nodded, his expression grim. I'm saying there's a good chance someone altered this report. Or, worst case scenario, someone faked it. I felt like the floor had just dropped out from under me. Fake an autopsy? How? And more importantly, why? I showed up at Claire's house that evening, heart pounding, hands shaking. I didn't bother knocking. I just walked in, finding her in the living room, sitting on the edge of the couch with a glass of wine in hand. She looked up, startled, when she saw me. Ross? She said, setting down the glass, her smile faltering. What's going on? You look upset. Upset? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Yeah, Claire, you could say I'm upset. I just found out that Mom's autopsy report might have been faked. Her face went pale, but she quickly recovered, her expression smoothing over into that familiar mask of calm. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to me, Claire. I took a step forward, my voice trembling with barely contained anger. I hired a private investigator. He found the report. Mom didn't have any heart condition, so why does her report say she did? She opened her mouth, but no words came out. For the first time, she looked genuinely rattled. Answer me, I demanded, my voice echoing through the room. She glanced around as if someone might be watching, her eyes darting to the doorway before finally meeting mine. Ross, you need to stop this. Stop what? I hissed. Asking questions? Trying to find out the truth? What are you hiding, Claire? She closed her eyes, taking a shaky breath before looking at me with a cold, steely gaze. Fine. Yes, I handled everything. Because your mother was hiding things. Things that would ruin everything if they got out. I did what I had to, for her sake, and for yours. What the hell are you talking about? I demanded, feeling like I was losing my grip on reality. You don't want to know, Ross, she said quietly, her eyes narrowing. Some things are better left buried. I stared at her, feeling the weight of her words settle over me. But I couldn't walk away now. Whatever secrets she was hiding, I was going to find out. And no matter what it took, I was going to make sure my mother's memory was put to rest, with the truth. The days that followed were a blur. I doubled down, digging through every scrap of information I could find, calling old friends of my mom's, visiting her favorite places, trying to find something, anything, that would give me a clue. And the more I searched, the more I uncovered pieces of a past I'd never known. My mother hadn't been the woman I thought she was. There were whispers, old rumors about debts, affairs, secrets that had been buried so deep even her own children hadn't known about them. And at the center of it all was Claire. I went back to Daniel, desperate, hoping he could piece it all together. And piece it together he did, uncovering a tangled web of deceit, betrayal, and lies that spanned years. In the end, I was left with a choice: confront Claire with the truth, or let the past stay buried. I chose to confront her. But when I showed up at her door that final time, I wasn't prepared for what I found. She was gone, leaving behind a single note that read: Some things are better left buried. I told you, Ross. And just like that, she vanished, leaving me with nothing but questions, and the haunting realization that I might never truly know who my mother was. Looking back now, I still don't have all the answers. I've spent years trying to put the pieces together, but every time I think I'm close, another question arises. Maybe Claire was right, maybe some things are better left buried. But I'll never stop looking. Because somewhere out there, buried under layers of lies and secrets, is the truth about my mother. And one day, I'll find it. In the weeks that followed Claire's disappearance, I couldn't shake the feeling of unfinished business. She was out there somewhere, hiding. And I knew, deep down, that I wouldn't be able to let go until I had answers, not just for me, but for my mom. Claire had taken everything my mother was and buried it under a mountain of lies. But I was ready to dig it all up. I threw myself into the search. Daniel was relentless, scouring records, following her trail through online banking statements, and interviewing anyone she might have reached out to. If Claire thought she could outrun me, she had another thing coming. Finally, we caught a break. Ross, Daniel's voice crackled over the phone, excitement barely restrained. I've got her. She's in Charleston, South Carolina. Booked a room under her maiden name at a bed and breakfast. Been there for over a week. South Carolina. Of course, Claire had grown up there, and I'd even visited a couple of times as a kid. It made perfect sense for her to hide somewhere familiar. And maybe she thought I'd never look there. I'll be there by tomorrow, I replied, my voice cold and steady. This was it. I was going to confront her, once and for all. The air was thick with humidity when I stepped off the plane in Charleston, the scent of salt and magnolias heavy on the breeze. I found the bed and breakfast, a quaint, unassuming little place tucked away in the historic district. I hadn't told Daniel I was going alone. This was between Claire and me. I sat outside the bed and breakfast, watching the building for hours until, finally, Claire emerged. She was dressed simply, in jeans and a loose sweater, her hair pulled back in a way that made her look almost ordinary. But I knew better. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out of the car and walked up to her. "Hello, Claire," I said, my voice steady. She froze, and when she turned around, her face went pale. She took a step back, eyes darting around as if looking for a way out. "Ross," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What? What are you doing here?" "Oh, I think you know exactly why I'm here." I looked her dead in the eye, feeling an unfamiliar calm settle over me. "It's over, Claire. I know everything. And I'm not leaving until you admit the truth." Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked around again, her panic evident, and finally nodded toward a park bench nearby. "Fine," she murmured, walking over and sitting down. I followed, my heart pounding as I prepared for what I'd waited so long to hear. After a moment of tense silence, she finally spoke. "All right. What do you want to know?" "Start from the beginning," I said, voice low. "What really happened to my mom?" Claire's shoulders slumped, and for the first time, I saw something almost human in her. She looked at me, her face weary and worn, and finally started talking. "Your mother and I. We didn't exactly get along," she admitted, staring down at her hands. "She knew things about me. Things I needed to keep hidden. She'd threatened to expose me." "What kind of things, Claire?" I pressed, feeling the anger bubble up. "Financial things," she whispered. "I had debts, big ones. I needed money. And your mother, well, she was sitting on a decent amount from her family. She knew I was in trouble, but she wouldn't help me. Said it was my mess to clean up." "So you thought you'd take it from her," I spat, the pieces finally snapping into place. "You faked her autopsy, didn't you?" Her eyes flitted up to meet mine, and the look in them was chilling. She was going to ruin everything, Ross. She told me she was going to cut me out of everything, take you and Vanessa, leave me with nothing. I couldn't let her do that." I leaned in, my voice low and venomous. "So, what did you do, Claire?" She swallowed, visibly struggling to find the words. I paid someone to fake the autopsy. She had a minor health issue, something completely manageable, but I made sure it looked like something worse. A fatal heart condition. That way, no one would question it when she was gone." My fists clenched so tightly my knuckles turned white. "You murdered her," I said, my voice trembling. "And you tried to bury it." She didn't deny it. Instead, she looked down at her hands, silent. "Did you think you'd get away with it?" I demanded, my voice rising. "Did you think I wouldn't find out? Honestly?" She whispered, almost to herself. "Yes. I thought it would be over, and I could finally have some peace." "Peace?" I barked out a humorless laugh. "You destroyed our family, Claire. You stole my mother from me, all for money?" She flinched, but there was no pity left in me. I stood up, looking down at her with nothing but contempt. "Ross," she started, her voice pleading. "Please, let's just move on. What's done is done." "Oh, we're moving on," I said, pulling my phone from my pocket and holding it up. The recording app had been running the entire time. Her face went pale again as realization dawned. You recorded that?" "Yes. And it's going straight to the police." She jumped up, reaching for me, desperation flooding her face. "Ross, you don't have to do this. We can work something out, money, a new life, anything. Please." I stepped back, watching her crumble. It was a pathetic sight. The once arrogant woman who had smirked, telling me to let it go, was now begging at my feet. But I felt nothing for her. Nothing but disgust. "It's over, Claire," I said coldly, turning and walking away. "You're going to pay for what you did." Claire was arrested the next day, the evidence stacked so high against her that there was no hope for her defense. The autopsy report, the recorded confession, and Daniel's expert testimony all painted a picture that left no room for doubt. The trial was swift, and in the end, she was sentenced to life in prison for conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and a host of other charges. Vanessa and I watched from the back of the courtroom, side by side, as the verdict was read. She grabbed my hand, squeezing it tightly, and for the first time since our mother's death, I felt a sense of closure. It wasn't over, not entirely. I'd lost my mom, and nothing could bring her back. But knowing that Claire would never again be able to hurt anyone, never again be able to twist her web of lies. That was enough for me. A month after the trial, Vanessa and I returned to Pittsburgh. We visited Mom's grave together, standing there in silence for a long time before Vanessa finally spoke. "You did the right thing, Ross," she said softly, her hand resting on my shoulder. "Maybe," I murmured, looking down at the headstone. I wish I could tell her. I wish she knew that I didn't give up." "She knows," Vanessa said, her voice breaking a little. She knows. As we stood there, the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the cemetery. For the first time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could let go. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and let the peace wash over me. I'd gotten my revenge, but more than that, I'd found the truth. And that, in the end, was the best way I could honor my mother's memory. And as we walked away, leaving the past behind, I knew that whatever came next, I was ready.